Hello, everyone. This is the Wednesday, October 2nd version of Wednesday with Walton and Newberry, brought to you here at thecardinalnation.com in video form and via audio on the Scoops Sports Network and all your favorite podcast apps. Hello, Blake.
Hey Brian, how's it going?
Good. We got a couple of things to talk about. Last week, right after we posted our podcast on Wednesday, the Major League Baseball finally announced all the players that will be going to the Arizona Fall League, and very little information had trickled out ahead of time about that. So we can talk about the 8 players and one manager who's going there. But we also want to spend a significant amount of time talking about the changes that are coming to the player development organization. Of course, we knew Gary LaRocque was leaving, but now the big announcement this Monday, of course, and we'll get into the details of that and our personal thoughts on such. So let's start with the Arizona Fall League. As folks know, it's considered sort of a prospect finishing league, players who are on the cusp of joining the majors. And interestingly, this year, the Cardinals are sending one player who has major league experience in Thomas Saggese. He's one of 8 prospects from the Cardinals who will be joining their peers from the White Sox, Dodgers, Reds, and Phillies on a team called the Glendale Desert Dogs. And again, Glendale is one of the 6 teams in the Arizona Fall League. Every organization, these 5 organizations pooled together to staff this one team. And the manager of the Desert Dogs will be Ben Johnson, who's been with the AAA Memphis Redbirds the last few years, and a good choice, I think. So let's first talk about the 3 position players going down. I mentioned Thomas Saggese. The other 2 are catcher Leonardo Bernal. Saggese's our number 6 prospect. Bernal is our number 9 prospect. And then the 3rd position player is outfielder Nathan Church from Springfield. The latter 2 players, Bernal and Church, finished the year at AA. And of course, as I mentioned, Saggese had the opportunity to play a handful of games in the major leagues at second base and shortstop as the season ended. What do you think the Cardinals are going to be wanting to do with Saggese in the desert?
Yeah, I thought Saggese was a really interesting choice, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked it because when we saw Saggese make his major league debut, he showed some of the exact same issues we saw with him throughout his entire minor league career, which is his chase. Basically, he chases the ball a ton outside the zone. He's moderately aggressive in the zone, but not as aggressive as you would expect for somebody who's as aggressive as he is outside the zone. So really his swing decisions as a whole are just not great. So, and we saw that at the major league level, he chased like a 40% rate, which is well above league average. And granted, small sample size and all of that, but I think this is an opportunity for Saggese to go out to the desert and really just work on his pitch recognition. And I think that is really the biggest weakness in his game. And if he can overcome that flaw and improve that flaw in the offseason, or I guess kind of the offseason in the Arizona Fall League, then he really can actually set himself up for a lot of success at the major league level next year.
What's your take on Saggese's defense at shortstop? Do you think he's good enough that he could be the backup for Mason Wynn next year?
Yeah, I do. I think that was maybe the hope of the Cardinals when they put him at shortstop this year in AAA. And Saggese actually surprised me by how well he played at the major league level. And he played well in AAA when I watched him. I mean, obviously he wasn't as consistent, but he flashed. He's actually sneaky athletic. Like I think, a lot faster than people think he is. When you just watch him play, which is huge because it gives him the range that he needs to actually stick in the middle infield. His arm is good enough to make plays deep in the hole. Like if he was the everyday starting shortstop, I wouldn't necessarily be super comfortable with him playing there, but I think absolutely as a guy who can fill in when Mason Wynn needs an off day or if Mason Wynn gets hurt for a month and you need a guy to play shortstop for a month, I think Saggese can be that guy.
So Leonardo Bernal spent most of the year at High A Peoria. Prior year was down one level at Palm Beach. Bernal was one of the most consistent players in a Peoria offense that really wasn't very good. Bernal got the opportunity to move up to Springfield late in the year when Jimmy Crooks, who had a fantastic year with the bat as well as defensively for Springfield. So Bernal got a little taste of AA, and now he's going to get to go to the Fall League, our number 9 prospect. What's your take on Bernal?
Yeah, I like the decision to send Bernal. I think the Cardinals probably knowing that if they weren't going to send Bernal, they were likely going to send another catcher. If they're going to send another catcher, it's Jimmy Crooks. So I think really
And Jimmy Crooks already went last year, so why send him again?
Exactly. That's the point. I think they were really choosing between Bernal and Crooks already went. Bernal was younger, maybe slightly better as a prospect because of the production he's had at his age, at the level he's played at, and he hasn't been there yet. It makes all the sense in the world to send Bernal there. And I was a huge fan of that decision. I think it'll be a big opportunity for him to grow, playing some more advanced prospects as a guy who really hasn't gotten really above the high A level.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how organizations typically get to designate one player as a priority player, meaning they get to play 4 days a week. I'm assuming JC will be that guy, but I'd like to see Bernal get regular reps as well. We'll have to see how that goes. Third player, Nathan Church, Springfield, not a top prospect, but a guy the Cardinals chose to send down. Outfield at the upper level of the system, fairly weak, right?
Yeah, it's pretty weak. And I think the Church decision makes sense. I mean, he's not really a top prospect, but he checks a lot of boxes. Like he hit really well at the start of the season, cooled off kind of towards the end of it. You would like to see him stay consistent, but he makes a ton of contact. He actually has pretty good speed. He's played all three outfield positions. He can play center field pretty well. He improved his stolen base efficiency this season, takes walks at a decent clip. He really doesn't have much power at all. You'd hope to see that improve. But my point is there are some tools to at least appreciate with Church there. It's not like he's a non-prospect. Personally, I would have liked to see a guy like Chase Davis go and get the chance to really build on the season that he put together, especially in the second half. But I can understand maybe just shutting him down and letting him work on some things in the offseason and sending Church instead.
Yeah, first full season for him. So, I think
Exactly.
Chase Davis obviously will. He got a sample of time at Springfield, just as Bernal did. He'll probably open next year there, and we'll have to see how it goes. But certainly, you would think that Chase Davis would be a prospect to go to the fall league a year from now. On the pitching side, heavy left-handed contingent, heavy starting contingent. We got Alex Cornwell, who spent most of the year at Springfield, but also had a little shot at Memphis. Bryson Motts, who spent the year in the Peoria rotation, and then Eshawn Henderson, another lefty who was very, very good at Palm Beach and then moved up to Peoria. So 3 left-handers. We're not sure who the Cardinals' designated starting pitcher is going to be. Let's talk about these 3 lefties.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Eshawn Henderson is a name I was not really expecting to see on this list, considering his kind of lower end draft capital, but he's actually a guy I like quite a bit, and I'm perfectly okay with sending him. I think he's a really interesting decision. His bat missing ability dropped a little bit as he climbed the ladder, but I do think there was enough there to make him actually an interesting prospect. And I believe in our latest prospect update, whatever month that was, August, maybe September. Yep. I think I had Henderson in the top 30. So
yeah, we've got him at number 26 in the blended rating.
Exactly. So I'm perfectly okay with sending Henderson. That makes sense to me. And if he's the guy the Cardinals designate as a starter, I would understand why.
Yeah. Alex Cornwell, of course, he kind of got moved to the pen, and then when Springfield got all those pitching injuries, he moved into the rotation. Didn't put up super flashy numbers, but he's a guy that they can call on to give him innings.
Yeah, Alex Cornwell is actually super interesting to me. I think he's a guy who's probably underrated by most prospect watchers, but and that's not to say he's like an amazing prospect, but I think when you look at him, he has a fastball that's kind of similar to Andre Palante. It's not exactly the same. It doesn't cut as much, but he gets a little bit of cutting action on the pitch. It's a four-seamer that actually sinks more than his sinker, and it actually sinks more than his changeup, which is crazy. And it's a pitch that gets a ton of ground balls. And I think that's really what the Cardinals like with Cornwell. He's a guy who's shown better control in the past than he did this year, really limits his walks, can really get ground balls, occasionally can miss bats with the cutter that he works in. Like he's not a non-prospect. I think there's more flashy names in the system, but he's a guy who you could really see coming in and being like kind of a lefty ground ball guy out of the bullpen.
Yeah, Bryson Motts was a second rounder in 2022. Was pretty successful 2023 at Palm Beach. Struggled quite a bit when he moved up to Peoria this year, but came on better in the second half. He slipped down our prospect list. He's down number 44.
Yeah, Bryson Motts is a guy I'm really not high on. And I think he was a second-round pick of the Cardinals, and I think they really expected his changeup to improve when he got into pro ball, and it really just hasn't. His changeup's just not great. His sinker and his slider combo is great. It misses bats. He'll keep the ball on the ground at times. Like that's a really solid combination, but I see him as a two-pitch guy going forward. His changeup hasn't taken the steps it needs to take. It got hit really hard in single A, it got hit hard in high A. His curveball he tries to throw in, but it's more of like a show me, like first pitch of the at-bat kind of a pitch. It's not really a great pitch overall. So personally, I would like to see Motts as a reliever. Now, there's obviously no need to rush him into a bullpen role. Make him fail as a starter before you put him there.
Well, chances are good in the fall league. He'll be a reliever.
Exactly. I think chances are good that he'll be a reliever, and I'm actually really curious to see how he does as a reliever because I do think that is his long-term role if he does end up making it to the majors.
And then the two right-handed pitchers, Trent Baker from Springfield and Matt Swanson, the closer from Springfield. Swanson's our number 29 prospect. Baker was kind of a swing man. He started the season in the bullpen again because of all the starting pitching wealth it looked like they would have at Springfield, but Baker got pressed into starting duty later in the year.
Yeah, Baker's a guy. He was probably the name I was most surprised to see on this list going to the Arizona Fall League. And I know the Cardinals have developed him as a starter. His fastball is actually kind of interesting. It's kind of rides a little bit. It runs a ton. He's not a terrible prospect, but I don't think he's a guy who's super flashy. I think there were names that I would have probably expected to see go to the Fall League instead of him. Like I look at a guy like Takeo Roby who came back from injury and made like 3 appearances. I would have expected him if he's coming back from injury to make like 3 rehab outings to continue his season in the Fall League. He didn't.
Yeah, Roby may not have been healthy, but Ian Bedell for sure. I mean,
exactly.
They brought him back on the last day. He pitched 1 inning, made a start for Memphis, and I had assumed they were setting him up for the Fall League, but for whatever reason, his name wasn't on the list.
Yeah, like there were a number of guys who I think are much more highly touted prospects, we'll say even much better prospects than Baker that I would have expected to see actually go to the Fall League. And I would expect Baker to be a reliever and not a starter.
Oh,
Granted,
yeah.
Maybe he's a starter, but I wouldn't expect it. And I think a guy like Jack Ralston, actually, who used to be kind of a prospect, got hurt a ton, but flashed some really, really good stuff when he came back this year and is a little bit older as a prospect. Like, I think if I was looking at a guy who's going there as a reliever, I would prefer to see a guy like Ralston than a guy like Baker. Obviously, that's a personal preference. The Cardinals obviously don't agree, and that's totally fine. But Baker's not a guy I was expecting to see on this list.
Last name, Matt Swanson, 27 to 27 to save opportunities for Springfield. Really a lights out guy, all-star in the Texas League. A guy that we talked many times about the fact that we would like to have seen him challenged at Memphis in the second half of the year. So at least he's going to get to go and show his stuff in the Fall League.
Exactly. Swanson makes so much sense to send. I love the decision to send him there. His peripherals took a step back, but I think he has more in the tank. Hopefully he shows that. And he is potentially a 40-man consideration this year. I mean, he is Rule 5 eligible. I'm not necessarily expecting the Cardinals to add him, but I do wonder what a good Fall League would do for him.
Yeah. So that's Arizona Fall League. Games start on the 7th, a week from this Monday. The Glendale Desert Dogs don't play their first game until Tuesday the 8th, but we'll have daily recaps on all the players down there every morning at the Cardinal Nation, and I'll be down there around the end of October to take in the Glendale Desert Dogs action and hopefully talk to all the players and manager Ben Johnson as well. So look forward to that down the road. All right, part 2 of our discussion this week is the big announcements that the St. Louis Cardinals made on Monday, and specifically the part we're going to drill down on is the new role of Chaim Bloom, who folks probably remember was an executive with the Tampa Bay Rays, did very well there in an organization that gets a lot done for a little amount of money, specifically in the areas of development of minor league players. And that's a key reason why Bloom, before the 2020 season, was hired as to lead baseball operations for the Boston Red Sox. And there was good and bad in Bloom's time there. He lasted, I think, 4 years before he was fired. He was challenged in that the ownership wanted them to cut payroll. He made one of the worst trades in a long time when he moved Mookie Betts to the Dodgers, but he kind of had his feet to the fire on that. But one of the things Bloom did very, very well with the Red Sox is he improved a player development system, was dead last when he joined the Red Sox to the edge of the top 10 when he left. And that was a big, big deal because the Red Sox, like the Cardinals, wanted to be in a situation where their farm system supplied low-cost talent to the major leagues. So Chaim Bloom will be in charge of player development and performance for the Cardinals next year. And then he has been given a 5-year contract that starts the following season to be the president of baseball operations when John Mozeliak retires. Were you surprised with this announcement at all about Bloom taking over, or was it something that you thought was pretty well cast in beforehand?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. I think if I recall the last version of this podcast correctly, Brian, we talked about how I think I mentioned Bloom could potentially be a candidate for director of play development with an eye towards him potentially replacing Mozeliak. And you shot back with, well, he's much too qualified for that role, and that appears to have been the case. He's very qualified to be well above that and has now already signed a contract to be the next player.
But in all fairness to you and a nod to you, Bloom will be hiring the new director of player development, the replacement for Gary LaRocque. And that's, going to be a very, very important role, obviously. And he's already started, apparently, in trying to fill that role. Now, there's got to be much more done to help the minor league system beyond just having a new leader. A lot has been written, a lot has been discussed about the lack of pitching labs and hitting labs, that the Cardinals have fallen behind in adoption of new technologies and in hiring the people to run them. The Cardinals admitted that they got in a mode where they used resources that would normally be developed used for player development, and they use them to beef up the major league payroll. Now, the other side of the coin would say, well, if the player development system was producing, they wouldn't have to go and buy their entire starting rotation. But that's not the case. That's the situation that they're in. And so it's going to be a challenge for the Cardinals to figure out how they're going to make these new investments while still trying to have a credible major league team on the field.
Yeah, and I think we saw Bill DeWitt mention it too, where he shied away from the term rebuild, get with the connotation that you're kind of tearing things down completely and starting from scratch. And I think that's fair because if the Cardinals are going to listen to offers, and by all indications are that they will, on guys like Nolan Arenado, Wilson Contreras, Sonny Gray, name any of the veterans you want, like that makes sense, but it's not going to be a full-on rebuild because they still have young guys like Brendan Donovan and Mason Wynn and Alec Burleson and Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman and the two young catchers and young outfielders, all of these guys who can at least be credible major leaguers, while the Cardinals maybe redirect where their resources are going. And I think it's fair to say that it shouldn't be a full-on rebuild. It should be more of like a 1, 2, 3 year reset. You know allocate funds towards player development if that's what it takes, and then hopefully, ideally, that brings up younger players into the majors, and then you have a new cycle of young controllable players. Now, I don't understand why the Cardinals can't put money into the major leagues and the minor leagues at the same time, because I guarantee you to invest in like player development, it wouldn't cost more than like the contract you gave out to Lance Lynn in the offseason to do so. So you really don't have to cut payroll that significantly to do it. But that appears to be where the Cards are headed.
So let's talk about that. The terminology, the term du jour is reset. And that apparently is more politically correct than rebuild. Frankly, I think it's playing name games. If the Cardinals can really do it in 1 to 3 years, like you said, then yeah, maybe it's a quick rebuild. But, whether you call it reset, rebuild, whatever it is, the Cardinals have said, we're going to spend less money on the major league payroll and we're going to spend more money on player development. Now, as you pointed out, and we don't know the exact number of the budget for player development, but I guarantee you it's not 200 million like the major league payroll is, or thereabouts. So the fact that, and Mozeliak said, we're looking at increasing player development spending 8 to 12%.
Yep.
Well, if they cut the major league payroll by 8 to 12%, that's going to be a lot bigger cut than they're going to spend on player development. Now, that's not a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise to you. Think about this. Attendance down 11% this year. Profit has to be down more than 11% because they had heavy discounting on tickets this year and a high percentage of no-shows. So yeah, while they sold the tickets to the season ticket holders, they didn't come and buy expensive beers and expensive hot dogs. So the Cardinals, it's I'm not defending it, but it's only logical, this cycle of the team plays poorly, so attendance goes down, so they have less expense for player payroll. The only way to break that role, other than that model, other than to get player development providing low-cost players, is to say, I'm going to take a loss as a business and I'm going to invest. And the Cardinals have never said they're going to do that, because I believe, and Bill DeWitt, loves the game, there's no doubt about it, their primary benefit, their primary target is not to win World Series. It's to run a profitable organization. And if they can get in the playoffs and get lucky and make the World Series, that's icing on the cake. But they're businessmen. They're there to make money. I don't necessarily like it, but I get it.
Yeah,
It's
I
your
mean, I
technology.
completely agree with you. That is exactly how I would describe it. And I think honestly, this is an opportunity for Bill DeWitt to, like, as you mentioned earlier, if you have a bad team, you get fewer people in the seats in the stands, and then that means much less revenue coming in, and then you have less money to invest in the team, and it's one cycle. I think this is built an opportunity for Bill DeWitt to cut costs, make more of a profit in the next few years while he's cutting costs, and then hope that they can do some sort of like philosophical reset that actually puts the team in a better competitive advantage moving forward, where then he can maybe inject more cash into the team and then in return make more cash himself and still maintain that same profit level while also having a winning team on the field. I think it's when you look at it from an owner's perspective, you have to balance the business results of it. And I think as fans, we don't enjoy doing that. I think we wish that it was more just go win games. But I just simply looking at it, zero emotion involved. Bill DeWitt wants to make money. And I think this is his opportunity to make money and then to continue making money in the future while hopefully putting a better team on the field.
Or at least keeping the losses down here during this period where the
Yeah.
major league teams not playing well enough to fill the stadium. Um, we talked a little bit about this of investing in player development. Let's talk a little bit about what that might mean. Player development right now includes the players' salaries, the coaches' salaries, travel, housing. Now for the players. But some of the things that the Cardinals have talked about is putting more investment in people and new technologies. And some of the examples that have been thrown out there, in the series that Katie Wu did at the Athletic, which was very eye-opening to many, I'm sure. They talk about Jordan Walker and they talk about Ivan Herrera. That Herrera wasn't particularly adept at controlling the run game. And they look back and say, hey, the Cardinals didn't have a catching coordinator since Dan Billardello, who left I don't know 6 or 8 years ago.
Wow.
And you'd hope that there was somebody who was with Herrera more often to help him before this deficiency got exposed in the major leagues.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there was a similar thing about the Cardinals not having like a full-time outfield instructor, which when you look at them trying to convert literally their top prospect, Jordan Walker, into an outfielder, it feels like it might have been helpful to have a full-time outfield instructor to help him do that. And I think that's where we should see those funds allocated is towards better coaching. And not even necessarily better coaching, but more coaching.
Yeah,
Having
and
more
let's talk about that for a minute because Jordan Walker, I mean, the Cardinals had a third baseman that they were going to have for a long, long time, and that was well known. And for whatever reason, the Cardinals waited until Walker was like halfway through his Double-A year before they said, "Oh, gee, maybe we should move him to the outfield."
yeah.
And there's no reason they needed to wait that long. We all knew what the situation was. But Walker got to the majors, and he certainly had deficiencies in outfielder. The other side of the coin is, what's Willie McGee doing? I mean, Willie McGee's a full-time coach to the major league. He's got 3 Gold Gloves. If Willie McGee can't help Walker in the major leagues, and Willie McGee's not a base coach, he's not a bench coach. So I honestly believe the biggest problem with Jordan Walker, and granted, his defense isn't where it needs to be. The biggest problem with Jordan Walker is his bat. And nobody's talking about how his hitting got screwed up. And that's a much bigger problem as far as I'm concerned. I believe if Jordan Walker was hitting like he did when he was a rookie, the defensive problems would get washed over, or he'd be playing DH or whatever it is. So I tend to think that Walker's defensive deficiencies are getting too much attention and not enough focuses on how did he get so screwed up as a hitter and what are they going to do about fixing that?
Yeah, I mean, that's totally fair. When I think about Jordan Walker as a prospect, the thing that pops out immediately is his bat. He crushes the ball. And now you would hope that he would continue to crush the ball at the majors, and he does, but he just doesn't get the results. And you would want to see him get the results. But I think as we look about like defensive positions, I think this is also offers the Cardinals an opportunity to maybe correct a little bit on some of the decisions they've made in the past. Like, I think if the Cardinals are going to maybe take offers on some of their higher paid veterans, we shouldn't be seeing Alec Burleson in the outfield very
Right,
much. He
right.
doesn't play good outfield. We shouldn't see Jordan Walker in the outfield very much unless they're fully committed to making him a right fielder, in which case they really need to up the coaching on that. We shouldn't see Nolan Gorman at second base anymore. Like, I think there's an opportunity for some of these guys to move around, play first base if Paul Goldschmidt's gone, potentially third base if the Cardinals want to move on from Arenado. Like, there's opportunities there, and I think that is part of what this reset can do is maybe start to shift some players back into some more natural positions as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned Nolan Gorman, another guy who has played a credible second base, but again, the biggest issue and the reason he's in the minor leagues is his hitting and his
Yep,
strikeouts. And,
100%.
and Dylan Carlson, who John Mozeliak famously, when he was coming up, compared to Oscar Taveras and Albert Pujols, was never able to take as a hitter. And, the Cardinals have instructional issues, more than just defense as well, in my opinion. And I'm not sure, which personnel they're going to use or how they're going to address that, but I think it definitely needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, when we look back at even this Cardinals team at the major league level, what was the most disappointing part of it was probably the hitting. And I think, and when we look down to the prospects that never really developed their bats in a way that we would have expected them to, it seems like that's a consistent theme throughout the system is we should see better hitting development occurring. So I'm really curious to see what happens this offseason, especially with Chaim Bloom moving into more of a, not necessarily director of player development, but a guy who's hiring the guys who are going to be in charge of that.
And he's going to be, all indications are that Bloom in 2025 is going to be fully focused on player development and performance. And, when I mention performance here, I'm really talking about the guys who handle strength and conditioning and trainers and medical. So it's not only getting them ready player-wise, but making sure that they have the right types of programs to be strong and healthy and, to succeed.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of opportunity for the Cardinals to improve at the hitting level specifically, as we've discussed. I think a lot of the publicity has gone around, the Cardinals are falling behind when it comes to pitching and pitching analytics and the pitching labs and all of that. But and that's certainly fair. I think there is plenty of room for the Cardinals to grow there. But there's also room for them to grow when it comes to hitting development. And that is something I think shouldn't be swept under the rug. And I think when we look at just across the system, there's a lot of opportunity for this organization to improve the whole and how they develop young players. And that's what I'm really excited to see is if they can really take that next step and start producing some of those internal guys who not only crush the minors, but then get to the majors and continue to improve and become those regular MLB starters.
And I posted an article last week about the challenges the Cardinals had in rookie ball. We don't have time to talk about that today. And it wasn't asked in the press conference whether international is under Bloom's purview or not. But the Dominican Summer League, the Florida Complex League, those teams have struggled. They're primarily Latin American players. The Cardinals have not spent their allocation even on international players in the last few years. So, I'm hoping they'll be looking at the international program as well as what they're doing domestically.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, I think when you see some of the best teams in baseball today, like the Dodgers, for instance, they spend a ton of money in that market, and they spend a lot of time trying to find the right players to bring into the organization. And you see that blossom with some of these Latin American guys coming through the DSL and the rookie ball levels, and then making it to the major league level. And you would hope to see more investment there by the Cardinals in the future.
Yeah, other than Herrera, there's really nobody on the 40-man roster who came through the international program. And we don't know if Herrera is going to even be a Cardinal next year as they try to sort out, what's going to happen at the catching position next year. So a lot to watch this winter. There'll be more opportunities, obviously, to gather more information, I'm sure. And it's funny, I met Chaim Bloom in spring training. I had the opportunity to talk with him for quite a while, just one-on-one, standing there watching a game. And he told me at that time that his goal was to go all season without ever being quoted. He wanted to make sure that our conversation was completely off the record. And he actually made it because although technically Monday was the last day of the Major League season, at least for the Mets and Braves, and at that point in time, obviously, he's now talking. And he's, again, Chaim Bloom. They didn't announce what Chaim Bloom's formal position is, whether he's still just an advisor or what it is, but he's definitely the guy in charge of the minor league system for 2025. So should be fun to watch, invigorate maybe the system and get some new excitement.
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes sense the way the Cardinals handled Chaim Bloom. They bring him in as an advisor, almost let him get comfortable with the organization, kind of do an audit of the organization, see what's going on, what could be improved, what works well. And then this year, you bring him into a more hands-on role, have him hiring people, taking a longer-term look at the future. And then next year, or I guess after the following season, then he really takes over full-time and leads the organization. It makes sense, I think, as a progression plan.
Yeah, well, it looks good on paper. Now we'll have to see how it works in implementation mode. Well, with that, we're going to conclude our October 2nd version of Wednesday with Walton and Newberry. And of course, we'll be back on the 9th. By then, the Arizona Fall League will get underway. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of other interesting topics to discuss at that time. So thanks, everyone, for listening this week. Blake, thank you again for your time as always.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Talk to you next week, everyone.